Hey guys, this is Ryan, the anomalous ambassador of the airwaves, and I'm bringing you a very interesting, hard to believe episode today. But before I do, if you haven't had the opportunity to head over to my website, heroparanormal.com, please do. You can access a ton of content behind the paywall. There's a bunch of stuff back there, just a ton of it, for the price of a cup of coffee a month. That's one cup of coffee every 30 days. And we have tons of stuff back there. You can access the same content as you do on Patreon if you search for Hero Paranormal. And we also have Space Wolf Research t-shirts. Space Wolf Research patches are coming online here very soon. Your support actually helps pay for things like the website, pays for things like earphones, cables, computers that go out, etc. It helps me blast off. And getting to that, if you're listening via YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. I don't know if you've heard the theory of the demon Al Ghul, but he is a demon who's very archonic in nature, and he has a rhythm, where we get the word algorithm. Help me break through the algorithm of control. The shadow ban is real. All right, getting down to brass tacks, let's do this.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on an amazing episode of the Hyper Anomalous Esoteric Research Organization podcast, also known as Hero Paranormal, broadcasting from spacewolfresearch.com, located just south of the old Bigelow Ranch in the Uinta Basin of Utah. My name is Ryan, the anomalous ambassador of the airwaves, bringing you an out-of-this-world episode today. It may seem like truth is stranger than fiction, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The human body can only see a certain spectrum of light, very minimal, can only hear a certain spectrum of sound, also small percentages. And when it comes to our overall senses, we do not incorporate, see, or understand the majority of the wavelengths that are bombarding our bodies. Take, for example, Wi-Fi. Can't see it, but need it. We rely on it. Radio waves, can't see them, but need them. We rely on them. There's a lot we can't see, including electricity. We switch the light switch on when we go into a room and we expect the light to turn on. We can't see what's running in those cables. In fact, even when there's a live wire and an open cable, we still can't see the electricity until it arcs. Which brings me to a comprehensive evaluation into an amazing scenario and situation, all revolving around an ionic air purifying system that was sold by the Sharper Image. Now, there has since been a lawsuit which caused the Sharper Image to claim bankruptcy, and we will get into all that. But first, let's look at some of the electronics behind this air purifier and some of the patents that made it happen, namely the Townsend-Brown electrogravity device, file 24-185. We are going to review the possibility of electrogravitics, electrokinetics, and their relation to propulsion, gravity, anti-gravity, force production, in the International Journal of Geosciences, Volume 6, Number 4, April 20, 2015, we read the following abstract. Electrogravitics and electrokinetics can be traced to Townsend Brown's first article, How I Control Gravity, Science and Invention, 1929. With the unexplained alignment of molecular gravitors, Brown reported that the dielectrics had high propulsive force when the differently charged elements were aligned with the voltage source. Perhaps electrogravitics was also revealed in the article. Gravity nullified. Quartz crystals charged by high-frequency currents lose their weight, which appeared 2 years earlier in the same magazine in September of 1927. I know it sounds far-fetched, however, the editors had a change of heart, so much in fact that in the following issue of September 1927, they rescinded the article. Much of what we know about T.T.Brown is from his numerous patents and articles, reprinted in Electrogravitics Systems Volume 1, by this author who was fortunate to correspond with him in 1981 when he was at the University of Florida. A sample of his detailed correspondence is contained in the out-of-print book, Ether Technology, A Rational Approach to Gravity Control by Rho Sigma, 1977. And in the recent Defying Gravity, the Parallel Universe of T. Townsend Brown, Paul Skatskin, in 2009 by Embassy Books. Also, a 5-minute Brown-Bosson lab video online shows many of the experimental models that Brown developed toward 1960 with colleague Agnew Benson. It gets weird, real quick, real fast. And on January 31st, 2003, before the space shuttle broke up, NASA announced that it would no longer be funding its Breakthrough Physics Propulsion program. Why would this be? It was the world's largest visible anti-gravity project. Well, may have something to do with Thomas Townsend Brown. NASA claimed a working anti-gravity technology is still decades away at least. Interesting, because it seems that the research of T. Townsend Brown could be found in an Ohio garage almost 100 years ago. Thomas Townsend Brown was born in Ohio in 1905, 2 years after the Wright brothers took off. Long time ago, for sure, but he was already dreaming about space travel. He was already inventing things with X-ray tubes. And he did this type of stuff the rest of his life. He applied a high-voltage electrical charge to a capacitor, as a young boy, a device for storing electricity. He attached to the glass tube and suspended it from the ceiling. To Brown's amazement, the tube began to, fly, rotate, apparently propelled by electricity. At the age of 18, Brown was taken under the wing of Dr. Paul Beefield. Now, Paul Beefield was an associate of Albert Einstein and also a colleague and close friend. Brown deeply impressed Beefield with his discoveries, his inventions, his experiments, and the way he manipulated electrical current through capacitors. Woe and behold, electrogravitics was born. Brown had made little craft, which were just a few feet in diameter, which he demonstrated hovering and rotating. Military classified projects took him on, but they neglected to support his research. Trust me when I say I know that feeling. It's hard to get a paycheck out of the United States government. Military officials classified his results, and they would not support Brown's research. This seems to happen time and time again when you have inventors that invent this type of stuff. A really good example of this is the Cameleo project, which Robert Guffey outlines in his book Cameleo by the same name. His fellow colleague in Freemasonry, which went to the same lodge, was the actual inventor of this invisibility cloak technology. Yet, the American military did the exact same thing. They came, they met with him in his laboratory, they saw his results, his experiments, they saw the product, and while impressed, they neglected to support him. This proves when they see what they want, they don't need to pay you for it. They just take it. And so was the case with the Cameleo camouflaging technology, a company which was then known as SAIC, Scientific Applications International Corporation, met with him and acted like they were not interested, but likely moved on it. Interestingly, this exotic technology was purportedly tested and experimented with just beside my fence line here at Space Wolf Research, allegedly under the umbrella of black projects. Going back to Thomas Townsend Brown's discoveries, it seems similar and proved to be the story of his life. Brown really never got amazing funding, at least not the amount that he was deserving of, but he continued to invent, research, experiment, and develop his ideas until his death. I get that. He just kept grinding. Among the companies that used Brown's theories are BAE Systems, NASA, and Boeing. The lifters being used by American Antigravity and others are quite literally being built on Brown's vision. They are skeletal metal frames that can lift a pound of weight propelled by an electric current. And when you look at the other things that parasitically are using Brown's invention, it's just about everybody. Everybody's name is on the lists of patents that use Brown's initial patent as a baseline. There's a ton of them. And the list of names are all your typical military contractors. According to the Army Research Laboratory, ARL, and note that this was a destroy after reading document, when a high voltage is applied to a capacitor whose electrodes have different physical dimensions, the capacitor experiences a net force toward the smaller electrode. We have verified this effect by building 4 capacitors of different shapes. The effect may have applications to vehicle propulsion and dielectric pumps. They have reviewed the history of this effect briefly through the history of patents by Thomas Townsend Brown. At present, the physical basis for the Bayfield-Brown effect is not understood. The order of magnitude of the net force on the asymmetric capacitor is estimated, assuming 2 different mechanisms of charge: conduction between its electrodes, ballistic ionic wind, and ionic drift. Enter the ionic breeze air purifier. The calculations indicate that ionic wind is at least 3 orders of magnitude too small to explain the magnitude of the observed force on the capacitor. The ionic drift transport assumption leads to the correct order of magnitude for the force. However, it is difficult to see how ionic drift enters into the theory. Finally, we present a detailed thermodynamic treatment of the net force on the asymmetric capacitor. To understand this effect, a detailed theoretical model must be constructed that takes into account plasma effects, ionization of gas or air in the high electric field region, charge transport, and resulting dynamic forces on the electrodes. A series of experiments should determine whether the effect occurs in a vacuum, aka space, and a careful study should be carried out to determine the dependence of the observed force on gas pressure, gas species, and applied voltage. At this moment, I should go on the record and say that I added the enter the sharper image ionic purifier comment, and I added the aka vacuum meaning space comment. The rest was all Army Research Laboratories. But I thought those were important comments because it's important to see how this relates to the overall story. Moving on. Interestingly, among the disclaimers of this particular report, At the bottom of some of these documents, it says, destroy this report when it is no longer needed. Thank goodness nobody destroyed it, or else I wouldn't be able to gather that information and bring it to you guys. And there's a bunch of other disclaimers at the end of all these documents, but most importantly, there's a lot more information that goes into the reality that Thomas Townsend Brown knew what he was talking about. Looking back, it really seems as if the guy was a genius who gave the military-industrial complex all they asked of him, but couldn't catch a break from them. What makes Thomas Townsend Brown an amazing individual is that he shares many of the same traits as other artists, other geniuses, other miracle workers, in that he could never really keep a steady job or get the funding he deserved. He did hold some interesting positions, however. He lived a very dynamic life of research and bounced around a lot. He attended the Atlantic Fleet Radar School in Virginia after Pearl Harbor. Interestingly, he terminated his service in 1942 and asked to resign. In his own words, for the good of the naval service in order to escape trial by general court-martial. Seems like he knew some heat was coming his way if he continued experimenting the way he was. Really, that's all we know. Not a whole bunch more, so we don't know what was coming down the pipe at him. He had a no comment in the official record. Thomas Townsend Brown continued to work on anti-gravity devices. But he wasn't just interested in military projects, he also worked in regular community. He helped found the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Most of us know this as NICAP. And although he did investigate UAP, which are known as UFOs back then, he quit researching them because he was purportedly using committee funds to finance his own research. He never really liked to fight, so he always just gracefully bowed out and moved on in other directions. A pretty amazing man. He did patent in 1928 a device known as the gravitator. And anti-gravity remained his obsession. And rightfully so, because he seemed to have mastered it. He could make things levitate, move around, use these devices as a form of propulsion. He maintained that he produced a mysterious force that interacted with the pull of gravity to produce movement. After World War II, Thomas Townsend Brown promoted his inventions as a motive of power for aircraft and spaceships. One particular physicist who saw his demonstration remarked that the energy was a well-known phenomenon called the electric gentle wind. In 1979, it's important to note, William L. Moore and Charles Berlitz published The Philadelphia Experiment, Project Invisibility. This book said that it was a factual account of how the United States Navy had done research, development, and experimented accidentally teleporting the warship known as the USS Eldridge. In Chapter 10 of this book, they claimed Thomas Townsend Brown assisted with the experiment. They also claimed that unidentified flying objects used the same propulsion method as Thomas Townsend Brown invented. This comes into play as we discuss some of the adverse health effects that are known to affect people in close proximity to UFO and UAP craft, especially around the Sherman Ranch. It's been making waves in Congress lately. It's known as interference syndrome technically, and was found by Dr. Kit Green, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We are going to delve deeply into that towards the end of the podcast. That being said, Thomas Townsend Brown may have been the first person to accidentally demonstrate the quote-unquote ionic wind. Many claim that this is the same technology applied by Ethan Krauss and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology when powering their flying devices. Yeah, that's right, they have them too. It seems like a lot of people have them, and there's a long tradition of ion-powered flight. According to Krauss, he tested hundreds of configurations on his path to self-contained ion-powered flight. He made it important to downsize the power components so that they could be carried aloft. He also said, and I quote, "I went from a car battery, really heavy boxes, like Seversky had," he said, "to these tiny things that weigh nothing." It took about a decade of work for Krauss to build his ion craft, and it flies with a power supply on board. There is some very unique technology coming out of MIT, as there always has been. And according to Krauss, if you hook a solar panel onto his flight device, it will just run and run as long as the sun shines. He is yet another inventor using T.T.Brown's baseline inventions and manipulating it in a way to fit his own needs and those of MIT. Very unique and creative needs, and his goal is, of course, for this flight to take place in outer space. On a side note, even Rolls-Royce has revealed a concept for a flying vehicle with vertical takeoff and landing, which will be electric. Everyone is getting in on this scenario, realizing that the assemblage of electrical dynamic craft are projects where the future is now. MIT engineers have completed some of the most amazing flights with planes which have no moving parts. Of course, this does not hold a candle to what the military-industrial complex and many black-budget contractors have accomplished, many of those with ties to T.T.Brown, his purported experimentation and work. Lockheed Martin, Rand Corporation, Raytheon, Boeing, the list goes on and on. It's not just military contractors. It seems like just about anybody with the right components can make a flying device in the garage. In fact, MIT engineers have hinted that there are balsa wood projects and plans for how someone can make these things. As hobbyists, of course, we have all seen the movie The Astronaut Farmer, and government doesn't want that taking place. So how does all this work? Brown said it is all vibrations of energy, but there is a structure to the process that can be explained with the strong nuclear force holding the atoms together as the future unfolds. Also, the possibility and topic of time travel is a recurring possibility throughout the Townsend-Brown experimental processes. As an example to note that, consider this from the popular book about Thomas Townsend Brown called The Man Who Mastered Gravity. This is a conversation between Brown and his soon-to-be son-in-law, Morgan. Morgan was sitting with Dr. Brown at his remote lab in Homestead, Florida over the Christmas break in 1965. And I quote, "The next evening or early morning, I wasn't getting much sleep on this trip. I found Dr. Brown at his desk. By then, he was making me feel welcome, as if in his mind he had already married me to Linda and I was his son. I remember thinking how weird all that was. After that afternoon on Biscayne Bay, we started to cover more topics than our previous conversations had covered. And then he dropped a bombshell on me. He said, if it turned out that it would be possible to travel in time, what would you choose to do? I'd go back and save my little sister, I said. He nodded, and after a bit of pause, he said, but if there are some natural rules against that, then what would you do? All I could think to say was I'd help whoever I would be allowed to help and enjoy the adventure. Dr. Brown just smiled. I finally asked him, "Is time travel possible?" And he very simply answered yes. I believe it is possible. In your lifetime. The first thing that comes to mind is the paradox of time travel. In your lifetime. If time travel is possible in your lifetime, then it is by definition possible, period. Had Thomas Townsend Brown figured out a way to manipulate time? Some have alleged that it was a possibility. And those are people who were close to him and would probably know. Brown believed that lifters created their own gravitational localized fields. Now, when it came to the types and shapes of the devices that he would use his purported antigravitics on, he typically used the forms of saucers and triangles, interestingly. And he also said that the weak nuclear force comes into play when the atoms decay, forming processes that cannot be measured over a period of time, forming the concept of half-life. And speaking of time, he was way ahead of his time on this one. Electromagnetic force forms a continuous exchange of energy, forming what we experience as time, with the spontaneous absorption and emission of light, forming potential photon energy into the kinetic energy of electrons. Kinetic energy is the energy of what is taking place. So now we know what's going on. We have potential anti-gravity devices, technology which can be used as propulsion, possible manipulation of time, if not time travel itself. And what does this all have to do with air purifiers? Ionic air purifiers are said to reduce allergens, dust, and mold, and make a filterless, maintenance-free, wonderful living space for people in their offices, bedrooms, etc. However, what are they really doing? Apparently, these have been tested in a variety of surroundings, and they're up to much more than just cleaning the air. These may be emitting light waves of electromagnetic radiation. In fact, we can interact with it. The gravitational force is a secondary force to the EM force because it is the characteristics of three-dimensional space which are arising. In other words, the energy twice as far from the source is spread over 4 times the area. In fact, energy will always be at right angles to the surface of the sphere, with electromagnetic fields always interacting at right angles. So if you have a source with a particular strength, the energy twice as far from them, or twice as far from the source, is spread over 4 times the area, hence 1/4 the intensity. This is how quantum gravity is explained. We all know that quantum physics and quantum mechanics are the new catchphrases. It's the new buzzword, quantum entanglement, and of course, the quantum aspect has a lot to do with potential time travel and propulsion. So, with all that said, I guess we owe big thanks to Mr. Brown. How in the world did he figure so much of this out? It's interesting to note that Thomas Townsend Brown was born into a wealthy construction family in Ohio. He was always interested in electronics in early childhood, and his wealthy parents indulged him, buying him whatever he needed for his own experiments. Interestingly, according to the government, after completing his basic training, Brown, because of his background in experimental electric research, was ordered to report to duty at the United States Naval Research Laboratory in D.C. According to note, he had dual roles as a rank-and-file sailor and a research assistant on the Navy submarine S-48 in the Navy Princeton Gravity Expedition to the West Indies in 1932. He was assigned to the yacht Caroline, which was loaned to the Smithsonian Institution for Scientific Work by Eldridge R. Johnson. And there's another synchronicity and coincidence, being that many allege he worked on the USS Eldridge with the Philadelphia experiment. Well, anyway, let's stay on topic. On the yacht Caroline, which was loaned by Eldridge R. Johnson, Brown was tasked to operate sonic sounding devices during the Johnson-Smithsonian Deep Sea Expedition to Puerto Rico. Brown was not only assigned to naval research laboratories with primary duties of sonar and radio operation, but he did also continue scientific work. Brown was promoted to lieutenant in 1939 and was assigned for a few months as a material engineer for the Navy's flying boats being built at Glenn L. Martin Company. You may now know this company as Lockheed Martin. He was engaged in magnetic and acoustic minesweeping research and development under the Bureau of Ships in Washington, D.C. After leaving Lockheed, Brown moved to Hawaii, where he was temporarily a consultant to the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. Due especially to his Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet Admiral Arthur W. Radford's interest in Brown's ideas on gravitor devices. I love that word, gravitor. I think he nailed it with that name. Anyway, in '52, Brown moved to Cleveland, Ohio. He had high hopes of selling his gravitor device to the military, yet they acted like they had very little interest in it. In '55, Brown went to England and France, research testing for the Société Nationale de Construction Aéronautique, SNCASO. Brown demonstrated what he thought was an anti-gravity effect in a vacuum with his device. Needless to say, this is exactly what you need to get amazing propulsion in space. Well, Brown became involved in the subject of unidentified flying objects in '56 big time. His experiments and research did not keep him from exploring the area of ufology. He made enough time for it. So much so that he was truly, fully invested, and he helped found the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which is now known as NICAP. He worked as a research and development consultant for Agnew Bonson's Whitehall Rand project, an anti-gravity venture at the Bonson Company of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He also set up his own anti-gravity corporation, Rand International Limited. He filed several patents. In the '60s, he worked as a physicist for Electrokinetics Incorporated, then kind of went into semi-retirement living in California. Most important here is the anti-gravity research and how it lends itself to the ionic air purifier, the ionic wind. Brown refined his invention over the years and eventually came up with designs consisting of metal plates or discs charged with 25,000 to 200,000 volts that would produce a propulsive force, which he continued to claim was anti-gravity. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from the 9th chapter of the book, The Man Who Mastered Gravity. Brown mounted the Coolidge tube in a careful balance, as if it were an astronomical telescope. His idea was to point the tube in different directions and somehow find a variation in the power used by the tube, the strength of the X-rays generated, or something. He didn't find what he was looking for. No matter where he aimed his apparatus, no telltale differences appeared. But he did find something he wasn't looking for. He found that the X-ray tube generated a thrust, as if it wanted to move. He soon learned that the new force was not produced by the X-rays, but by the high voltages which they required. Many experiments were necessary to make certain that that force was not one of the known effects of high voltage, and that it is a mass force, like gravity, rather than an area force, like most known electrical forces. Now, in 1923, Brown attempted to share his theories with his instructors at Caltech. He invited them to laboratories. He showed them what he had. They seemed to have little interest. After leaving Caltech, Brown studied at Denison University, where he claimed he had conducted a series of experiments with a professor of astronomy, Dr. Paul Alfred Beefield. Now, Dr. Beefield was a classmate of Albert Einstein in Switzerland, and Einstein remained a close friend and colleague of Beefield throughout the years. It was obvious to Dr. Beefield that Brown's electrode motional effect was something profound. The phenomena could not find a conventional explanation because no traditional explanation had been provided for his manifestation. The effect was, in fact, a gravitational one. Brown and Beefield discussed how the momentary blurring of electric and gravitational forces might have provoked an electro-galvanic effect. Had Brown figured out the meaning of Einstein's field theories and the relation between electrodynamics and gravitation? It certainly appeared so. And actual experimental confirmation and practical results were given. But he ran into military and governmental dead ends, it seemed, everywhere he went. Unless it helped them, they did not help him. And showing them the code, the significance, the calculations, and the actual products themselves. This is something where other scientists could easily figure out the operation and do this work on their own. Maybe, just maybe, Brown was scammed for his inventions, much like Robert Guffey's friend in Freemasonry, Richard Schoengert, had his top secret equipment seemingly absorbed into the military-industrial complex, was never paid for any of his inventions. It just seems the way these things go sometimes, unfortunate but true consequences of a military-industrial complex. Interestingly, when you go to the patents and look under United States, US 2949550A, you find inventor Thomas Townsend Brown. The current assignee is Whitehall Rand Incorporated. And in Brown's own words, it reads as such: "My invention relates to electrokinetic apparatus, and more particularly to a method, an apparatus for utilizing electrical potentials for the production of forces for the purpose of causing relative motion between a structure and a surrounding medium. This invention was disclosed and described in my application serial number 293465, filed June 13, 1952, which application has become abandoned. However, reference may be made to this application for the purpose of completing the disclosures set forth below. The invention utilizes a heretofore unknown electrokinetic phenomenon which I have discovered, namely, that when a pair of electrodes of appropriate form are held in a certain fixed space, relation to one another and immersed in a dielectric medium, and then oppositely charged to an appropriate degree, a force is produced, tending to move the pair of electrodes through the medium. The invention is concerned primarily with the certain apparatus for utilizing such a phenomenon in various manners to be described. Priorly, intervening electrokinetic apparatus have been employed to convert electrical energy to mechanical energy, and then to convert the mechanical energy to the required force. Except for the insignificantly small forces of electrostatic attraction and repulsion, electrical energy has not been used for the direct production of force and motion. Since any conversion of energy from one form to another is accompanied by losses due to friction, radiation, or conduction of heat, hysteresis, and the like, as well as serious reductions in the availability of the energy by increases in the entropy of the system, it is apparent that great increases in efficiency may be achieved through the use of direct production of electrical energy and force, and motion made possible by my invention. Likewise, the elimination of the machinery for the intermediate conversations results in a great savings in first costs, maintenance, weight and space, the latter two being of great importance in self-propelled vehicles, including mobile vehicles, such as aircraft and spacecraft. It is therefore an object of my invention to provide an apparatus for converting the energy of an electrical potential directly into a mechanical force, suitable for causing relative motion between a structure and the surrounding medium. It is another object of this invention to provide a novel apparatus for converting an electrical potential directly to usable kinetic energy. Another object of this invention is to provide novel apparatuses for converting electrostatic energy directly into kinetic energy. And another object of this invention is to provide a vehicle motivated by electrostatic energy without the use of moving parts. Starting to sound familiar? Still another object of this invention is to provide self-propelled vehicle without moving parts. It's a feature of my invention to provide an apparatus patented August 16, 1960, for producing relative motion between a structure and the surrounding medium, which the apparatus includes as a pair of electrodes of appropriate form held in a fixed space, relation to one another, and immersed in a dielectric medium and oppositely charged. So here I think it becomes very obvious that this has some correlation. And if you don't think it does, look at the references cited and attributed to in relation. Look at the references cited in relation to this patent. And we have publication US 311 4517A, Raytheon Corporation, microwave operated space vehicles, US 3120363A, the Electron Atom Corp. Title, Flying Apparatus. The next one, US 3130945A. Assignee, the Electron Atom Corp. Title, Ionocraft. That sounds so cool. US 3263102A. The assignee, Wachovia Bank and Trust. The title, Electrical Thrust Producing Device. Fast forward. W020000586238A2. Gravitech Incorporated. Propulsion device and method for employing electric fields for producing thrust. Which brings us to US 200-100-489-06A1. Sharper Image Corporation. Electrode self-cleaning mechanism for electrokinetic air transporter conditioner devices. And that's what brings us to the Sharper Image. So how did a aerospace propulsion and thrust device become a Sharper Image air purification system? This is fascinating, but it's right there all on patents. You look at the patents, look at the devices, and you can see the mechanical chain of command as one patent morphs into the next. You look at the patent citations and how they are utilizing Thomas Townsend Brown's inventions and technologies, literally morphing one to the next with different assignees and publication dates cited. 95 of them in total. There's a bunch of them. And we're talking, the list goes on and on. I left a bunch of them out. We had Raytheon and a bunch of other aerospace corporations, but it's interesting how it goes down to Sharper Image Corporation for an air transporter and conditioner device. Quantum ionic thrust space exploration technology brought to your own home to clean the air in your office. Beyond far-fetched, but 100% true. What's interesting is there is purportedly what's known as the big unit, which is the largest unit that Brown produced, with no moving parts, an electrostatic fan/loudspeaker, which eventually became the Sharper Image Ionic Breeze Air Purifier. Anyway, the unit was described as being massive, taken to California, then reappears later. Where is this unit? I'm wondering if it still exists. Someone must have it. Because if you had this unit, you could quite literally build a anti-gravitic exotic propulsion system right there in your garage. So if somebody happens to know where this is, please reach out and let me know where the big unit is. Originally, it was with the Rand Corporation. I don't know if that's still the case. And it honestly looked just kind of like a levelure, an electrokinetic apparatus. So if you have this thing, give me a call. Let me know. I could definitely use it. Anyone really who wants to defy gravity and go to parallel universes could really use this device. And it's not that hard to make. Now, sadly, Brown never collected royalties to the Sharper Image air purifier. The Ionic Breeze air purifier was relentlessly marketed via TV infomercials for quite some time. Everyone recognized that the Sharper Image product was undeniably similar to the device that Townsend Brown was demonstrating in the 1960s. If not, they would not cite Townsend Brown in their formulation of a patent after he perished for a similar device. Now, someone reached out to the public relations office of Sharper Image, and they received an email from Sharper Image. When asked why the Sharper Image used this device, the response was this: "We appreciate your interest in our best-selling Ionic Breeze air purifier. This is a Sharper Image design product that was developed in-house. For information on the Breeze, how it works, please feel free to contact our website, sharperimage.com. Now, Sharper Image admits and clearly cites that the patent on which the Ionic Breeze purifier was based was on Thomas Townsend Brown's work. A very handy site where you can see this is Free Patents Online. You can easily pull up the patent in question. Take patent number 4789801 for electrokinetic transducing methods and apparatus and systems comprising or utilizing the same. This was applied for and based on the work of Townsend Brown, but applied April 3rd, 1987 by Jimmy Lee. It was assigned to a company called Xeneon Industries. Curiously, the law firm that handled the filing for Mr. Lee was Townsend and Townsend. A strange synchronistic coincidence, isn't it? But there is a smoking gun. And it is this. The site claims the electric kinetic transducer and apparatus and systems comprising the same have been known for many years. The electrokinetic transducers of the diode or two-array type and systems comprising the same are disclosed in U.S. Patent Number 3018394, issued to Thomas Townsend Brown, and U.S. Patent 2949550, issued to Thomas Townsend Brown. And further, the electrokinetic transducers of the triode or three-array type and systems comprising the same are disclosed in U.S. Patent Number 3518462, issued to, guess who? Thomas Townsend Brown. So there it is. They put this under quote-unquote prior art on which the patent for the ionic breeze is based. It consisted of not one, not two, but 3 patents issued to none other than Townsend Brown. It gets more intriguing, as if that's not enough of a smoking gun. And it reads, the prior art teaches that such electrokinetic apparatus may be used as an electric fan. When the exciting voltage applied to said electrodes is continuous, direct current voltage, or may be used as a loudspeaker. When the exciting direct current voltage applied to said electrodes is modulated in accordance with the desired sound output from the loudspeaker. And here you have it. These are both the quote-unquote loudspeaker application of Brown's and the quote-unquote fan application of Brown's technology, which blew Morgan away when he first saw it and heard it in Brown's study at Ashlon in the fall of 1964. Some computers have since used the same technology to clean the air while using a similar device as a cooling fan. An ultrasonic system, if I'm not mistaken. So, was Thomas Townsend Brown the man who mastered gravity? According to many books, documents, and U.S. patents, he is. And in the words of the book, The Man Who Mastered Gravity, he lived a twisted tale of space, time, and the mysteries in between. Thomas Townsend Brown was a little-known scientist whose discoveries in the realm of relativity and gravity control disappeared behind a veil of classified military research and UFO conspiracy theories. Only from time to time do his amazing inventions rear their heads in products we use daily. The trickle-down scientific theory. While his massive products are being flown over our heads, little products, which trickled down through the patent office, are used in our offices daily to clean the air. Interestingly, in some of the amazing documentation I found, a corollary effect in the force is tending to move a metallic disc, which by means of a plastic support through a fine wire. Basically, small little UFOs can be made very easily in your garage. Just take the disk of negatively charged energy. A propulsion force of a fraction of an ounce appears to move the disk in the direction you want. These effects have been witnessed by many. You can also make this electrogravitic device a communication device or a loudspeaker. The disc or electrometer. Regardless, the thrust developed by the model flying saucers, which you can make in your own garage, has its origin in the well-known phenomenon described by the electric wind. It's often been termed that the Tesla coil might be related to antigravitics, when in fact, Tesla came to the U.S. and he carried plans for a quote-unquote flying machine. Interestingly, a common factor between the Tesla coil and the Biefeld-Brown effect is that both of them utilize high voltage plays in a vital role. High field gradients between electrode plates can be produced in an AC circuit powered by Tesla coils. So why does the disc seem to work so well with these effects? Couldn't that be the shape that is best suited for the flying machines? Well, it's got to be that or the triangles, which T.Brown used in many of his inventions. Amazingly, Brown was a brilliant inventor, recruited into the powerful organizations of clandestine military groups, which seemingly now still possess the knowledge of instantaneous, silent, electric propulsion systems, and even time travel itself. Is this an effective system to move through the cosmos? It certainly appears so. An ion-propelled system. Now, I just bought one of these for my wife's office, and they're really cool. The one I got was one of the old school versions, hardly used, and through a different manufacturer, utilizing the same principle but higher power. And I did that for a reason. It looks out of this world. The system I bought has the 2 electrodes, and you can't hear anything, you can't see anything until your hands get close to it, or you move the air around it or cause some dust to go in there, and then you hear that static electrical sound similar to what many UAP and UFO experiencers speak of in their close encounters to some of these exotic propulsions. You know, where the hair on their necks stands up. You can hear a bit of a crackling in the ether, so to speak, or the atmosphere. But other than that, it's completely silent. I think that Thomas Townsend Brown was just one of those people who was a genius. He saw something that we literally have tons of, our atmosphere, and I'm glad that I use the word ether a little bit because it's almost as if he pulled this out of the ether and utilized ether itself to run through this device, this amazing, brilliant, silent electric propulsion system, and utilize it to quite literally make anti-gravity, make things float and move in directions. And speaking of the ether, the Earth creates and is surrounded with a gravitational field, which approaches zero as we go deeper and deeper into space. This field presses objects and people towards Earth, or towards its surface or core, purportedly, and therefore presses our conjectured vehicle to the ground, which makes it harder to lift off, that gravity that holds us down. However, through this technology and the utilization of the Biefeld-Brown effect, vehicles are said to generate an electrogravitational field of their own, which modifies the Earth's gravity field. That is the basic concept of electrogravitation, and it was presented in the form of the Biefeld-Brown effect. Sure, many of these corporations have done refinements necessary to accomplish their desired goals. Many of these aerospace corporations, Boeing is one of them. We had Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and last but not least, the sharper image. I think it's apparent that if you want to have a machine for producing these amazing, magical, hidden technologies of motion or force, you're going to have to utilize, at least in some way, shape, or form, some of the many patents by T.T.Brown. Oddly, some of the lawsuits which came to the sharper image because of this ionic air purifier are what caused the sharper image to claim bankruptcy, literally put them out of business. So why were these lawsuits filed? Some purport that the lawsuit claimed that the devices didn't clean the air and might produce unhealthy levels of ozone. So much like people who encounter health anomalies and adverse health effects being near exotic types of propulsion technology in these UAP scenarios, this was the claim, that these devices produced unhealthy levels of ozone, causing an array of physical ailments. The Sharper image said it included a filter on the new ionic breeze devices to convert ozone into oxygen. Under the settlement, the filters will be available at a reduced cost to people who have machines which lack them. If you go old school enough, the machine really kicks it out, as I mentioned earlier. Now, among the health effects that would seem strange were headaches. Yeah, has anybody heard of interference syndrome? Sore throat, coughing, asthma attacks, difficulty breathing. The symptoms go on and on. Go figure, plaintiffs, there's always idiots looking for a buck. Plaintiffs alleged in the marketing of the Ionic Breeze by Sharper Image that they neither explicitly or implicitly made representations to consumers that the product was effective or safe. They went on to attack how it was marketed, saying that Sharper Image said that this would remove, clean, and purify the air, eliminating pollen, animal dander, and other contaminants, and that it was effective in providing germicidal protection by killing bacteria, viruses, and mold. Sharper Image claimed it was suitable to clean the air in a 500 square foot room and provided relief from asthma and allergies. Well, I think this is a story of where if Sharper Image just would have kept their mouth shut and sold the device, if they wouldn't have made all these allegations and proposed health benefits, if they wouldn't have marketed it so extremely on television, they'd probably be okay. They also said that it produced beneficial levels of ozone. And consumers who were looking for a payout represented that it exposed them to hazardous levels of ozone. Ozone's another one of those things. It's hard to gauge whether it's good or bad, how much of this, how much of that. However, Sharper Image negligently, knowingly, recklessly, willfully, or intentionally concealed or failed to disclose or hide from consumers or the general public that the product produced harmful levels of ozone in excess. And here they've actually limited, they have found how much is harmful, but that the product produced harmful levels of ozone in excess of 50 ppb. Apparently, that exceeds the U.S. safety requirements. Well, long story short, court approved it, a bunch of attorneys and a bunch of consumers got rich off of it, and it just goes to show you shouldn't use aerospace propulsion, exotic technology to clean your airspace unless you're somebody like me and you just think it's cool. Now, looking at some of the harmful scientific health effects, they claim that this is harmful to unborn children, that it causes fertility issues, that it causes exacerbation of heart-related issues, that it causes irritation to the eyes, throat, nose, and lungs, but most importantly, damage to the brain, muscles, liver, and kidneys. Now, that damage to the brain part is where interference syndrome really comes into play, and I see an exact correlation between very real exotic propulsion systems and brain damage. Now, top brain experts and ex-CIA officers have revealed hundreds of military servicemen suffering brain damage or symptoms, even death, after encountering UFOs. So isn't it interesting that there is a correlation between T.T.Brown's invention and how he said UFOs were powered? And here we have the same effects by patents drawn from T.T.Brown's invention, in the case of the sharper image, and similar brain damage to encountering UFOs. Forensic neuroimaging expert Christopher Kit Green says he has dealt with hundreds of patients who were injured or died after interacting and encountering UFOs. He's claimed he is the go-to physician in the Department of Defense for unexplained morbidity and mortality. He said that he has looked at injuries and mortality from UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and he added, it is similar to Havana syndrome. Green, a professor at the Wayne State School of Medicine in Detroit, was in 2010 commissioned to write a paper about a secret $22 million defense program. We now know that is the same program which was based along the fence line of Space Wolf research in the Uinta Basin of Utah. These programs were known as ATIP and OSAP. Kit Green described the symptoms of multiple sclerosis, which I should mention. Jack Osborne and myself went out to this area, and we were filming for one of his media projects when he first encountered his first symptoms of MS. Connected? I think so. Anyway, what do I know? Kit Green describes symptoms of multiple sclerosis, brain damage, and burns among patients. When I was out on Skinwalker Ridge with Jack Osborne, he started losing eyesight in one of his eyes. And this was the first symptom he had of multiple sclerosis. But going back to Dr. Kit Green, the CIA doctor and expert on interference syndrome, he said that these symptoms were similar to the close encounters of the third and fourth kind events, and that symptoms of many of the cases were similar to the mysterious illness affecting diplomats and U.S. officials in embassies around the world known as Havana syndrome. Green said many of his patients experienced burns, brain damage, and that around 1 in 10 died within 7 years of their reported encounter. Now, Kit Green wrote a paper on injuries from close encounters with anomalous craft as part of the $22 million defense program monitoring UFOs. The CIA released a report from a panel of experts looking into patients. Now, according to the Defense Intelligence Reference Document having to do with anomalous acute and subacute field effects on human biological tissues, many of these same issues are addressed. And I quote, "This paper relates, summarizes, and analyzes evidence of unintended injury to human observers by anomalous advanced aerospace systems. Additionally, an argument is made that the subsequent work can inform, for example, reverse engineer, through clinical diagnosis, certain physical characteristics of possible future advanced aerospace systems from unknown provenance that may be a threat to United States interests." What? You can't make this stuff up. In Chapter 2 of this document and the background, what is thought to cause harm? This seems very important. It is well understood that long-term exposure to even chronic low strength, as in the ionic breeze air purifier, low strength as well as acute high strength electromagnetic fields, ionizing radiation, intense lasers, etc., can have harmful effects on human physiology. It is also known that EMR mechanisms can disrupt physiological and psychological functioning on a temporary basis. emerging data support that some of the chronic low-level effects alter the ability of cells to function properly due to epigenetic effects, which is damage to the DNA and RNA protein regulatory pathways, and simultaneously alter the metabolism of dividing cells, especially the neuroimmune system. The same holds true for exposure to toxic chemical, biological, or nuclear materials. So here we have the government speaking openly about a real problem known as interference syndrome, studied in close proximity, if not exactly at, the area where Space Wolf Research is located, a spot where many investigators into the phenomenon known as shapeshifter territory, the high strangeness of the Uinta Basin, so to speak. That's why ATIP and OSAP were focused in this area. They were looking for what the effects of exposure to some of these UAPs, UFOs if you want to call them that, these exotic propulsion systems. And we found that many aerospace engineers who work on purportedly reverse engineered craft utilizing some of these exotic technologies are some of the ones who have the worst cases of this because they're in close proximity to this exotic propulsion technology and encounter adverse health effects. So it's not just UFO researchers, UAP chasers, and people who hang out in areas like this, like Space Wolf Research, the Fort Duchesne area, so to speak, the dinosaur diamond, if you want to call it that, this focus area of high strangeness in the Uinta Basin of Utah, which I like to call shapeshifter territory. It just also happens to be the place where, according to Native American lore, this location was cursed by shamans opening Pandora's box, so to speak, and unleashing this entity known as the Skinwalker to roam the area with reckless abandon. Another coincidence or synchronicity. It really does seem as if truth is stranger than fiction, and this life and world hold more mysteries than you can shake a stick at. If you haven't been over to HeroParanormal.com, please head on over there. For the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can get all the content behind the paywall, and there's a ton of it. I promise it will entertain you. Also, if you're listening via YouTube, please, please, please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast for me. Although I will most likely never be monetized on YouTube for a variety of reasons, including the truth, this will help me break through the algorithm of control. The shadow ban is real. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off.